All right, we're back with some more What If alternate history. We're live on Twitch. It's your boy KhunShawn. We're going to be explaining the political triangle. Let's talk about it. Shout out to the commenters that checked out the top 10 taboo video. That was a really fun video, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, and I know what you guys meant when you guys said like sometimes he has some schizo ass videos. I checked this channel, but this is one of those videos I think is more interesting to see where we go in the future. So yeah, explaining the political triangle. Let's go. Link in the description, join the Discord, and join the Twitch, and let's have these conversations out loud.
I'm sure we all know the political compass. It's become super famous with loads of teenagers building their entire identities around what quadrant they're in, and people like my friends J-Reg constructing their careers around talking about it. A fun fact I
Ooh,
want to throw in here is that the political compass was invented by libertarian advocates to separate themselves from fascism and also to portray libertarianism.
let me read these. This is my destroy capitalism shirt. This is my church shirt. This is my shirt is for sale. This is my fight for the patriarchy shirt. This is my reading shirt.
To separate themselves from
Okay.
fascism and
Uh,
also to portray libertarianism as a political philosophy in
Gave communists free helicopter rides to view the beautiful Chilean scenery. Made sure communism was always on the rise. Leftism reached new heights under his regime. Rich elderly gentleman with a Catholic wife just looking to make America a great place again. Very religious and spiritual, has expressed admiration for Pope Francis, disliked by the Democratic establishment, which discreetly works against his presidential bids. Belongs to a religious minority, but is strong and stands up for his belief. Very supportive of his wife, who is a working mother. Number one target of online abuse by the alt right. Vocal advocate for the right to bear arms. Has written many plenty of books on capitalism. Have to pay an entrance fee to just visit his grave, which is a private property. Oh snap!
independent from the right or the left.
Interesting.
That's why there is a specific axis for libertarian versus
Would you ever do a podcast about subjects like these? Yeah, sure. I plan on doing a podcast with Chaotic Flow. We are going to open up a new channel. We're going to talk about stuff like this, but around the VTuber community. But yeah,
authoritarian
100%. I have no
rather
issues
than
with
the
it.
consensus wisdom of the right versus the left. I'm not going to be a Redditor and go all autist about what's wrong with the political compass. I think it does the thing it's designed to do pretty well. The purpose of language is to communicate a point, and thus if a system is able to effectively communicate an intellectual idea, even if imperfectly, we should keep it around. That
I
being
agree.
said, as an anthropologist and historian foremost, I find that the political compass breaks down immediately once you leave industrialized Western societies. An issue, for example, is that everyone in history before the 19th century is shoved into the authoritarian right-wing corner. The auth-right corner has loads of people who don't have that much in common, whether the Taliban, medieval Europe, the l'Ancien regime France, fascism. Another issue is that outside of the West, you'll see combinations of often socially conservative and big government, which don't make sense with our political compass. Where does Imperial Japan or the Umayyad Caliphate fit into this? People who try to put the Roman Empire on the political compass are silly. To be clear, I don't dislike this metric. I think the right versus left axis is intensely useful, and in fact, the clearest dividing line for the whole world over the last 200 years. In thousands of years, our time will be remembered as the global battle between the right and the left, from the French Revolution through the World Wars, leading to the Cold War, followed by the culture war today. That all being said, the further you go back into history, you see other divides, whether between Protestant and Catholic, church versus state, Sunni or Shia, or the eunuchs or mandarins in
There's
imperial
always
China.
conflict.
This is where the
Always.
political triangle comes in. It was
Okay.
invented as an anthropological tool to model every possible social structure in history. Every
Okay.
single society in history fits into this triangle. It's a bit deceptive in that it's somewhat similar to the political compass, but with a few important differences. The purpose of this video is to explain this triangle.
Okay, let's talk about it. What if anthropology, history, philosophy, geopolitics? This episode explaining the political triangle. I love this intro. It's so
All
2009.
civilizations must deal with a variety of issues, including debt. Debt is insane, and getting rid of debt can be incredibly difficult. But with PDS Debt, you can find the best way to get out of debt.
This is an ad.
PDS Debt has customized options for anyone struggling with credit cards, personal loans.
I'm not gonna lie, bro. I have no debt, so I'm gonna fast forward this. But if you guys have debt, you should definitely go check out that thing, man. I hope you get your debt cleared up. That is serious,
A
by the
great
way.
irony is that the political triangle was made by one of my best friends, Kurt
Nice.
Doolittle. Kurt is, in my opinion, one of the most intelligent public figures and one of the most important philosophers of our time. Although
Okay.
he and I don't agree on everything, my staff has
Normal.
a phrase called the Kurt Pill, which is meant to symbolize how learning about his ideas has completely changed our vision of the world. Kurt has made a few
Interesting.
very advanced intellectual breakthroughs, which, in my opinion, directly or indirectly will change the course of history. Kurt and I
Okay.
have been friends for
That's
2 years, and he's been watching Whatifalthist for the last 8 years. He's made 5 companies worth $100 million and now runs a
that's
think
big.
tank. I've had him check this video out to see if it fits with his understanding of the triangle. Kurt's ideas are very advanced, and I don't pretend to understand all of them. His theories are public on the Propertarian website. With all that out of the way, let's get started. There are a couple points I want to clear out before we start explaining how each of these works. An important distinction between this and the normal political compass that I've seen a lot of people get confused over is that the political compass has two separate axes, that being left and right and the other being authoritarian libertarian. Thus, each corner of the political compass shares something with at least another corner. This isn't how the triangle works, though. Here there are three polarities, with each corner of the triangle being like a magnet which sucks a certain society more so in one direction over another. The edges of the
Okay.
triangle is as extreme as possible for that one trait. The three edges of the triangle are authority, freedom, and theocracy.
I like
Given
this. This looks
these are the
good.
only three ways humans can interact, you find that different societies naturally end up recycling these methods in differing ways. This is based off the three economic relations, those being trade, hierarchy, or family. Life is about the consumption or sharing of energy, which originally comes from the sun. There are
100%.
three separate ways humans can exchange energy with each other. One is with trade, which we assume to be the only economic relation in our society, but that's kind of obvious, in which,
Remember what we said earlier. Money is the transfer of energy. 100%.
let's say I want your pizza, so I agree to pay you money for the pizza. It's consensual. Then there's hierarchy. The government orders you to pay them money. Alternately, a princely patron giving a donation to an artist in exchange for making a painting to glorify his rule. Thirdly is family. Families are economically communist. You are supposed to
Of
share
course.
resources in order to help your offspring, partner, or kin. These other two relations are more powerful in every other society, and thus we rarely think about them. The three edges correspond to fascism, liberalism, and communism, roughly. If you want to have a more fine tooth-combed answer, the societies which respond the most to each edge are the Vikings, Tsarist Russia, or Maoist China. Kurt's real genius here has been the ability to fully figure out the logical extensions of Darwinism. Thus, he has established social rules
Okay.
for how society functions based off understanding the incentive structures of how humans would interact if they were animals, like we actually are. Basically,
are.
taking an animal planet look at human societies through the lens of those who get resources and eats whom, not through the story the societies tell about themselves to justify it. If you've ever watched a lot of nature documentaries, which I was personally addicted to as a child, you find a very archetypal story of the
I used to
entrenched
watch
old
them.
alpha
Not all
male
the
with
time.
his mates. He grows old and cruel. Then the new young scrappy guy comes out of the wilderness to kill the entrenched elite and then mates with the females. This is literally the plot of The Lion King, and you can push this narrative onto
Long
almost all
live the
animals, whether
king.
baboons, lions, lobsters, or horses. In this system, the liberty axis are the young men who don't yet have power, and they form alliances of mutual benefit, or war bands. This is why groups like the Vikings, Cossacks, pirates, or feudal Europe were normally capitalist republics. Meanwhile, the established males are the authority axis, as you can see from the normal historic pattern of tyranny coming from strong government in exchange exchange for order. Meanwhile, theocracy is the women, who mate with whoever the victor is. This
Yep.
final bit will make more sense once I can explain it. Kurt
And
has
mate
made
with
the
the loser.
argument that this is the role of religion in human history, which I will explain. Kurt has crafted this to fit onto moral foundations theory, which for, like myself as well, John Haidt was a huge influence on his worldview. Theocracy pulls from the Care Foundation, meanwhile liberty for freedom or fairness, while authority pulls from loyalty, purity, and authority. We will explain this to a greater degree later. An interesting thing you might notice is that this is somewhat similar to the political compass, except for the removal of liberty.
Bro, I guarantee you that I'm gonna have a room just like this. So far, my book collection is only at 4, but eventually it will be at more.
Left.
That's a
Although that's
bar.
not perfect in that these traits don't perfectly correlate with the political compass, I personally find this justified since there literally aren't any lib-left societies
Bro, I ain't gonna lie, I like this. KGB land centristia, huh? And prime. Hmm. White land, Hitleria. What in the world? Greenla,
ever. I don't count
Leftia.
some tiny hamlet in Catalonia during the Spanish Civil War, which was crushed immediately or devolved into Marxist autocracy. The problem is that there is no vector in which to actually make choices or distribute resources or really govern based off lib-left principles. The fundamental reality is that the idea of forming group consensus and then making choices about that doesn't actually work in the real world. It's just completely impractical. That's not how the human condition works, and that you either need to organize people by hierarchy or a choosing mechanism like market or democracy. The reality is that when people try to push for libertarian left-wing social utopias, it just results in government authoritarian management. As you'll see later, the idea of a libertarian left utopia is a feature of the authoritarian left's propaganda and not a bug. One of the most important points of this video is that Kurt and I independently came to the same conclusion for why Western civilization was so successful. How the West was able to colonize the world, unite the planet together, usher in the scientific, agricultural, health, or industrial revolutions, alongside the Renaissance or Reformation, is due to the West having a balanced social structure. The issue most societies fall into is that they have a single ruling class who co-opt the society for their benefit, exploiting them. This happened with the bureaucracy in China, the priests in India, the slave owners in Rome, or the alliance of the warriors and priests in Islam. The society then stops progressing. What happened in the West was that a balance of power between the church, nobility, merchants, and monarchy, that none of them could take over and destroy the system. The West had institutions which balanced against these three axes, or church, state, and capitalism. Due to the West being able to activate all three axes, it was able to adapt to every situation. The West created a position in which it effectively hacked the Trinity and was able to hit exponential advancement as a civilization. As we get started, I will try to explain each of
My question is, how did it start to stagnate? I'm pretty sure that might be answered in another video.
these axes through the era of history in which it affected the given society the most. Part 1. Authority. The year is 1800 and we're in Russia. Tsarist Russia is one of the most absolutist states in the world. The emperor, or czar, has total authority as Russia doesn't have property rights in every single part of the society. It's an extension
Wow.
of the emperor's authority. The
Damn.
majority of Russia's
He's
population
powerful,
are
huh?
serfs. Serfdom in Russia is much more comparable to African American slavery than to West European serfdom, which a lot
Okay.
of you are probably more familiar with. The Russian serfs had basically no rights and could be beaten, raped, sold off, and often killed by their landlords. There's a
Wow.
story of an especially cruel noblewoman where some of her serfs accidentally made eye contact with her, and then she sent them off to Siberia as convicts, a fate nearly as bad as death. Even among the nobility, they would refer to themselves as slaves to the Tsar. The Russian nobility, upon penning their letters to the emperor, would refer to themselves as your humble slave. Russia was a society in which the entire social structure was
Wow.
based off absolute loyalty to your social superior. The serfs
Wow.
served their lords, and the lords served the Tsar. In Russian society, sacrificing your whole life to your superior was seen as normal. The Russian military would draft peasants for their whole lives in order to be more
Their
humane,
whole
shortened
life.
it to 25 years. The nobility, in turn, also had
Oh,
to
wow.
either serve in the military
More humane, 25 years of your life. Man, I'm telling you, man, the world we live in now is way better than what it used to be. Like, yes, I know we still have a lot of messed up stuff going on now, but bro, no, I count my blessings every day to be alive right now, every single day, because you never know what tomorrow could bring. It could be worse than it was yesterday. So today is the present. Enjoy it.
To 25 years. The nobility, in turn, also had to either serve in the military or the government. Russia is the most extreme example of the process of loyalty in of itself. If you folks want to know more, watch the video I made about Russian civilization.
W
However,
plug.
this is a thread you see all over history. Examples of other societies in which unquestioning loyalty to the ruler were dominant social organizing
I would have made
principles
a
are the
difference,
Inca Empire, which was one
bro. The people in school. Bro, when we were in school and we were talking about slavery, bro, I remember one kid, he was, well, yeah, because back then we were kids. He was saying, yeah, that wouldn't have happened to me. No, I would have fought back. Yeah, you would have been dead, bro.
of the most authoritarian
You would have been
societies
dead,
ever.
bro.
Persia, the Ottoman Turks, the Roman Empire, and basically every society
You wouldn't even think like that, bro. If you were born a slave, bro, you don't think about freedom because you're conditioned to only think about being a slave.
which has an emperor. As we'll see later, China is the society which built itself from the ground up based off these foundations. An important distinction is that the difference between this form of authoritarianism and the other theocratic feminine form we'll discuss later is that there is no ideological justification, really. For example, in communist societies, they're founded upon unquestioning loyalty to the state, but it's since the state is fulfilling some philosophic or holy goal. It's loyalty to the concept, where in Tsarist Russia, it's loyalty to your social superiors for being social superiors. A recent historic example of this is fascism. In fascism, the goal of unity inside the group is seen as a moral good in of itself. If you read Mussolini, he actually invented the word totalitarian and used it as a positive, in that the goal was for the state to take over every single aspect of a person's life. In Nazi
What a
Germany or
great
Imperial
idea.
Japan, on top of this goal was to completely submerge the individual into the
Sarcasm.
tribe. The idea is that it's not loyalty to tribe for the ideology the tribe has, but loyalty to the tribe because it's your tribe. What this means is this is a pretty cynical and practical worldview. It aims at dominance as its ultimate aim. This is why Kurt has correlated it with the established masculine authority. Effectively, we are already in power and would like to keep it that way. This isn't something our society likes, in that of the three axes, this is the one which has been most demonized in our current society. However, like the other axes, this one does have benefits. In that, order is necessary and can be positive.
Yeah, if we're all a tribe, of course, if we're all working together to make this tribe better, then yes, that is 100% a positive. But if the tribe is making itself better, but at the same time, they're losing their self identity and they're all, becoming under one person, whether it's the elder or the guru or whatever, that one person still has control of the whole village. And if they fall to corruption, well, then the whole village will end up following suit, man. Like, it's a slippery slope, as they say.
Positive if used correctly. In Jungian archetypes, there is the division between Mother Earth and Father Culture. Father Culture creates
Father culture. I've
stability
never
under
heard
which
this.
creativity and human civilization emerges, but in
Hmm.
itself devolves into corruption, tyranny, or being too restrictive. The advantage of this system is the ability to
Hey, I
operate
was
on
there.
scale. If the people in a group submit themselves to the group identity, it allows greater cooperation among larger groups of people.
It
John
does.
Haidt talks about how humans evolved to
You
be
just lose
individuals
individuality.
sometimes, but we have a switch built into us which allows us to turn into hive creatures like ants or bees.
Yes, the hive mind, the switch. Yes, 100% we do. 100%. You can see it in our social structure and our social mask. When we go outside, you know, we're we're all superficial, right? Nobody really shows who they truly are out in the public because if that was to happen, then we'd have chaos.
Due to this, there are conditions in which we are willing to sacrifice ourselves as individuals for the group. At these times, the individuals act out things that are in the strategy for the total group. This switch is the authority axis. In the emotional system I've developed, this axis corresponds very closely to shame and disgust, with shame being prevalent in Asian and non-Western civilizations civilizations and discussed with conservative societies. As I said before, this also fits with John Haidt's measurement, where this axis pulls from authority, loyalty, and purity. Effectively, this system exists to maintain standards for group behavior. People often like authority since they feel insecure in themselves as individuals, and most
100%.
of the population
People want to join something bigger than themselves. Yes.
actually craves authority.
Yes.
Also, the average person isn't that smart or driven, so they
That's
actually
also
do
true.
better by following the hive
Yes.
mind. This is
It's easier for you to just fall in line and have somebody tell you what to do than trying to think for yourself. Being an open-minded person and thinking for yourself, these are things that you have to just learn on your own. And unless you have some type of guidance, it probably won't happen, because how can you really teach yourself to think for yourself whenever the entire society that you live in is, the foundation and the basis is just do what you're told.
not politically correct to say, but this is even more true for women. In Eric Hoffer's great book on totalitarianism, he calls it a freedom from freedom. The massive social changes implicit to the Industrial
A freedom for
Revolution
freedom
caused mass social
from freedom, a
chaos, which
freedom
then
from
resulted in
freedom.
people craving authority, thus resulting in monsters like Hitler, Stalin, or Mao. You can pretty closely correlate how closely people follow this axis based off how militarily threatened that area is. I've talked before about how you can correlate authoritarianism based off the borders of the former Mongol Empire. This is since these were societies that were in proximity to the nomadic tribes who were the most deadly military opponents of the pre-modern world.
Wow.
Just the Mongols killed nearly 100 million people during the
Damn.
Middle Ages when the total world's population was 500 million. Thus, societies evolved to
Wow.
sacrifice the individual in exchange for the group to fight off the bloodthirsty nomad invaders. And if you want to look at Russia, our previous example, Russia became so autocratic partly based off the Mongol system of governance and also to fight off the Mongols. You can even see this on the European continent, which the countries which created democracy or capitalism were islands or coastal societies like Britain, the Netherlands, Athens, or Rome. The countries
Death
stuck in the
before
middle of the
dishonor.
map like France, Germany, or Russia became absolutist states. Poland's Lithuania is an example of an attempt to create a republic on the North European plain, and it was crushed by the authoritarian Austria, Prussia, and Russia. This is since in high-pressure situations, authoritarianism is the best social structure. This is why the military is based off authoritarian, unquestioning leadership. The same is true for companies. Whenever I run clubs or my own personal business, I realized you have to create clear hierarchical structures since it's the only way to get things done. You see, this is why most societies in history were autocratic monarchies, since by making an unfair system in which you pick the leader automatically, it lessens friction and allows leadership to move as smoothly as possible. That being said, the other side of this duality is that since the authoritarian system creates stability, it's also not creative. This is even more true in the societies like Russia or China, where they don't have that many alternate institutions to the state like a church, capitalism, or warrior nobility. The rapid changes implicit to the Industrial Revolution have made this system less popular vis-a-vis theocracy or freedom. You can see this over Russian history, in which Russia was constantly being outcompeted by countries like Germany or America, whose more fluid social structures allowed them to advance much faster. The authority-based social structure always ends up with Zerg-like military tactics using hordes of cannon fodder driven by unquestioning hierarchies. A great example of the
Unquestioning
implicit
loyalty.
flaws built into this system was that in the Soviet Union they had rules where you had to unquestioningly follow your superior in the military. And so you hear stories about Soviet units being told to walk directly into a river, and they did it, still drowning, because they knew if they didn't follow the orders exactly right, they were dead men anyway, so might as well just go into a river because there's at least some chance of survival. China is the society
Death
which is
before
founded most
dishonor,
so
huh?
off this axis, although it has evolved to have other axes. Peter Turchin has said that China as a nation has stayed unified so much over its long history due to neighboring the Mongol nomads, who were a great enough threat to create a reason reason for the Chinese to keep working together. If you look at China, as Francis Fukuyama likes to say, it's a strong state with a weak culture. Over Chinese history, most of the great fortunes were created by passing a test, which then allowed you to enter the government bureaucracy and then milking that power position for your fortunes. China never evolved a strong church that could push back against the government. The government strangled China's development, whether through preventing the Chinese from fully using the technologies they discovered, like gunpowder, the compass, the printing press, or the steam engine. This is a very common theme historically, and that capitalism is very rare, given the incentive for governments is to exploit their own populations. Oftentimes with the government working with the mob. The book Why Nations Fail covers this very well, in which Rome, China, Islam, India, or the European Union had elites which purposely degrew their societies, pushing them into poverty through regulation. China was on the verge of an industrial revolution during the Sung dynasty 1,000 years ago, but the bureaucracy regulated the factories out of effectiveness. The bureaucracy strangled the military's development so that China kept on being conquered by nomads who they outnumbered 100 to 1. China's ships sailed as far as Kenya and possibly America, yet the bureaucracy had no need for a colonial empire. In each case, the haves were scared of anything new since they were already on top. Watch my video on Chinese civilization if you want to know more.
That's a big one right there. Like, if you ever notice any country like slowly stop developing things, it's because there's a fear that once these new things come out, the old will be replaced by the new. Look at AI.
2. Freedom. It's the year 1000 AD in Iceland. Iceland is a society without a government. It was established by Vikings fleeing the unification of Norway into a single monarchy. The political structure of Iceland was that everyone met up once a year in the valley of Thingvellir. They would vote directly on various issues. Iceland didn't have a political leader, government, or bureaucracy. When someone broke the law, the electorate would declare them an outlaw and would say their neighbors could kill them and take their property without repercussions.
Yeah, give me that.
Another very similar society was Ireland at the same time. Ireland was a society full of various clans and tribal groups. There's a saying in Irish that every man is king of his own land. Ireland never had a centralized government, and any political growth was immediately torn down by intractable tribal warfare. That being said, the Irish were the freest people in Europe. With both of these systems, the benefits and negatives are pretty obvious. The Irish and Icelanders both had the reputation for being insane warriors. When the English colonized America with Jamestown, a lot of the guys who did so were veterans of the conquest of Ireland.
You gotta fight for freedom.
The natives are hard to fight, but at least they're not the Irish. The English tried to have Irish indentured servants or use them as slaves in the colonization of the New World. They stopped trying since the Irish had a nasty habit of slitting their masters' throats in their sleep. My father's side of the family is Irish, and my dad told me dozens of times growing up, it is better to spend a day on your feet than a life on your belly. Honor is the most important thing in life, or we're only barely civilized. The Irish were known for fighting with incredible fanaticism, in which the English literally needed to kill a third of Ireland's population, alongside wiping out its entire ruling class to get the Irish to submit. Then the Irish kept on launching revolts, constructing their entire identity around resisting. When Ireland got independence in order to take back the North, the Irish created the bloodiest and most successful terrorist movement in history. I've read a bunch of Icelandic sagas. Reading them, it's obvious how courageous and tough the Vikings were. There are so many incredibly heroic and Chadly content among the characters. I think we all know, though, that the Vikings raided and invaded so many places, sailing all the way from America to Central 100%. Asia. The plots of the sagas are mostly about intractable warfare between clans. With the absence of a centralized government, the way to mediate social issues is that if someone transgressed against you, often even in silly ways like insulting your sister, it then started intractable tribal warfare. Once someone killed your brother, you kill theirs, and then a few years later, half of your clans are dead. A major issue with this system is twofold, in that, as we can see, it doesn't have a way to mediate conflict, and thus there isn't unity. You can see this with both Ireland and Iceland being so torn apart by internal conflicts as to be colonized by external powers, which were
Wow,
England and
that's
Denmark,
worse.
respectively. There's a reason the authoritarians win wars. This means that as a society becomes more civilized and urban, the freedom axis gradually gets worn out. That makes sense
100%.
given this system is the rising or chaotic masculine. Our society has a very incorrect view of freedom in that we see it as egalitarian and peaceful. The reality is that freedom is inherently aristocratic and warlike. If you look at democracies, they only come from warrior peoples, whether the Vikings, English, Romans, Greeks, or Iroquois. The democracy stems from the warband in that someone's place in the warband determines their right to vote, since fundamentally force and power are the same.
Yeah. If you want freedom, you're gonna have to fight for it. Yeah, 100%, man. The free are the strongest.
This is why in medieval
That's
parliaments, the
why they're
nobility,
free, because they're strong.
who were the warrior classes, were those who
Strength
could vote.
creates
All
freedom.
of these societies have a strong sense of honor. In my emotional scheme, this value corresponds very heavily to pride and secondarily guilt. The thing is
Okay.
that when the warband is mobilized, the results are absolutely incredible. This axis in competition is by far the most advanced. The warband provides the structures for why the ancient Greeks, modern Europeans, Romans, Mongols, or so many other nomads were so militarily dominant. This is why so many of the great states in history have been militaristic republics, whether Britain, Rome, America, or Athens. This system allows flexibility and naturally pushes manly vigor. Again, the system is very strong, but also degenerates quickly given it's not organized as authority. The thing with this system is that once the warband is mobilized, it can crush all opponents. However, keeping the warriors working together consensually is pretty difficult, and thus it allows a good chance that the system deteriorates over time, and thus the authority-based structure, which is more stable, crushes it. The natural cycle of history is that a martial warrior nation based off a warband forms a society. Then, as it has to organize, it becomes more based around authority. Then a new barbarian people based off another warband conquers the area once the older one grows weaker and degenerate. It's very much like in a nature documentary, you see the baboons on the grassland, where the old male grows weak only to be taken down by a new younger one coming out of the desert. This system is also so militarily effective that it creates an incentive to use it to predate upon other populations. You naturally see this with the nomads of the Eurasian steppe, killing millions of people and raping and pillaging. This results in situations where the nomads themselves don't produce much, while they steal from other civilizations. A friend of mine once said the most passive people in the world were the Indians, and the most predatory were the Afghans. He said that this was by design, given India was predated by the Afghans, thus encouraging each kind of behavior through the other. This system, which internalizes competition, is also capitalism. Western Europe became capitalist while other societies did not, given the merchant classes in Europe started out as pirates. Thus, the centralized government couldn't
Ah,
control them, and they
yeah,
could demand
of
their own
course.
privileges
They're
due to being
pirates.
so well armed. Capitalism is such a successful social system given it allows permanent structured competition, which forces the best player to outcompete the rest. One of the interesting historic threads that no one covers is that the modern startup structure stems from pirate organizations, in which you
Hmm.
have a crew, either for the startup or the pirate ship, and they go on a venture together and then they share the spoils. The modern company was originally a pirate and then a trading expedition. A very similar dynamic on the negative side of this is the Atlantic slave trade. I know this pisses a lot of libertarians off, but the natural logic of the market without other institutions to balance it out is slavery. If you don't have laws against it, landlords will enslave their tenants, and the strong will enslave the weak. The Europeans or Muslims used their superior military ability to turn Africans into a commodity. Europe was able to fully evolve capitalism since it had a church and government to balance out the rapacious young masculine. If you're in a system where the only metric is based off transaction, then it's obvious that you should turn people into a commodity to trade. If you put this axis in charge of society, you will have the best results, even if it needs to be balanced by the other two axes. This is why the
It does
societies
need to be
built off this
balanced.
are the wealthiest, most technologically advanced, just nicest societies in the world. That being
That lead to very unhappy and unfulfilling lives, and people end up ending their own misery because they don't enjoy being there. Yeah, there needs to be a balance. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are if you end up taking your life because you don't enjoy the spoils of this luxury. Yeah, there needs to be a balance for all of them. All of these systems have some type of flaw, but within these flaws, I think you can try and find that balance. This one's flawed because of this one's flawed because of that. There has to be some way to correlate these things. Life is a pattern, man.
In capitalist republics. After that, societies which are socially built off capitalism may be authoritarian, which was Western Europe for most of its history. This is since this structure allows competition and improvement. The reason the West was so successful is that its social structure allowed creativity and self-improvement. If you operate off this structure, a legal code is necessary since you need the law as a way to arbitrate between differing self-interests. Inside the warband, you need a system of rules to arbitrate, while in the authoritarian system, you just submit to your superior's whims. One of the top points Kurt makes is that rule of law is one of the most important variables driving the West's success. You can almost perfectly correlate a society's rule of law with its net worth today. Part 3. Theocracy. The year is 1955, and we're in Maoist China. From the outside, this system may seem like the Tsarist Russia we spoke about before in the video. The government runs literally everything, while there is no private property or interests independent from the state. That being said, you notice something interesting the more you look. In Tsarist Russia, everyone submits to authority itself. In Maoist China, everyone is obsessed with an idea. In China, everyone is pushing towards utopia. When the state tells people to do things, they don't do so because the authority tells them to do so, but supposedly to reach heaven on earth. China at this point was going through the greatest self-inflicted atrocity in history. Over 30 million people died due to a famine called the Great Leap Forward, and 40
Yeah,
million people died.
we read about it. We read about it in this book right here, bro. The Great Leap Forward. Of course, it only touched on it for like a little bit, but yeah, 100%. This crazy, bro. I don't believe in coincidences, man. I'm gonna keep reading this book. This book's good.
In total with Mao's other atrocities. Mao Zedong, the
Mao's
communist
doing a lot of
dictator of
crazy shit.
China, had the aim of making China an industrialized modern country within 5 years. This involved forcing the Chinese to make steel. The problem is that what actually resulted was people not farming, thus causing famine. On top of this, China had none of the tools or infrastructure to actually industrialize or even make steel. Thus, they ended up
Bro was
making
trying to
lots
run
of
before
useless
he could
slag
walk.
iron with no real use for it. A huge driver of the famine was the attempt to use modern socialist agriculture. The problem here is that socialist agriculture was complete pseudoscience and just didn't work. This leads to one of the most toxic elements of this axis, that being the false promise. In this system, you mobilize people with the concept of something better. What we're seeing with Maoist China was an evil religion trying to mobilize people around faith. Unlike other religions, the heaven it offered was of this earth, not of the spiritual. It's interesting and ironic that I call Maoist China theocracy. The great irony here is that Maoist China was the most militantly anti-religious state in history, in that they persecuted the religious and tore down their temples. That being said, they were also the most theocratic state ever in history as well, in that their whole society, in every aspect of every waking moment of someone's life, was unified and driven around a shared holy project. Maoist China is the society in the whole history of the world which was driven the most by an idea. In Jungian psychology, the feminine is inspirational. Men push themselves hard in order to get laid. In Jungian principles,
100%.
the feminine is being and masculine is doing. If you want to look at nature, the women of the pack are very important, but they end up mating with whichever group of men takes over. The weight of child rearing pulls women out of the Darwinistic battle for survival, which men take responsibility for. This is even more pronounced for humans of any other species due to us having such long pregnancies, our heads being too large for women's hips for easy, comfortable childbirth, and our incredibly long childhoods. Due to their physical weakness, women wield power through relationships, sex, and verbal ability. Women do a thing called GSR, or gossiping, shaming, and rallying. This is using relational warfare in order to attain their goals. Women who use these kinds of tactics tactics do better sexually and reproductively than women who don't, and thus they evolved this ability. Women evolved more advanced verbal and empathic abilities than men in order to navigate or manipulate interpersonal relationships better than men. This is since women are physically weaker and don't work in packs like men do, thus they made up for it sexually and socially. Due to this, women's two great strengths became social skills and sexual access. We can see this very clearly today in that if you criticize modern women for anything, the immediate attack on you is to call you an incel, even if that's ridiculously untrue, since the aim is to discredit you through your lack of social status or sex. It's remarkable how common it is today once you know how to look for it and how many different ways it happens, but our
It's
society takes
very
these
frequent.
verbal attacks completely seriously. GSR is a form of social piracy and toxic femininity. Toxic femininity in general involves crabs in the bucket thinking, envy, social shaming, hysteria, conformity bias, the abdication of responsibility, magical thinking, removal of context, and distortion. It's effectively the manipulation of words to serve a social end. My friend Homath is a great example of this
Shout out
from
to
one
Whole
of his
Math.
videos
It's a
talking
good
about
video.
how a woman can
Good
use the
channel.
threat of ruining someone's reputation to get a promotion at work.
Bro, I'm seeing a pattern here, bro. First, I started watching the whole math, then I'm jumping to neuro knowledge, and now I'm over here on this side. This was recommended, and now he's talking about whole math, bro.
How a
Hey,
woman can use the threat
I think I found my click, bro.
of ruining someone's reputation to get a promotion at work is the equivalent of a man using physical force to bully someone into a promotion. This system is hardest to explain in our society since an aspect of GSR is the obfuscation of trying to understand it through social shaming. You can see through freedom or authority,
To
those
use
are
more
concepts we
emotion.
have very easy terms and ideas out in our society, but we don't have a word for GSR or any of this stuff because our society is so enthralled to it that you're not allowed to talk about it. If you were to imagine toxic femininity personified into an ideology, it would push for equality at the expense of merit, use distorted language to push for its aims, would hate greatness, abdicate
Double
responsibility to the
talk.
government. It would be obsessed with care, the avoidance of suffering, and would treat everyone in the population as children, being worried about their safety and regulating them. It would motivate people with the false promise of utopia. This is the ideological equivalent of women leading men on sexually. Doesn't this sound a lot like communism or leftism? Women have historically not really been in danger of dying in war. This is since the conquerors would just marry the women of the defeated tribe. In fact, the women nearly had an incentive to have their side lose a war, since the victor would be stronger and thus have better genetics to pass on and would protect them better. This would in turn establish an incentive structure to create a social system built mostly around emotional stabilization or ego protection. It would not actually be about solving problems, but making the people in the group feel as good as possible. The societies themselves would be dysfunctional, but they would have the most beautiful myths to justify them. We can see this parallel in leftism today, and if you're even more controversially, traditional world religions, where they don't make a barrier between what they want to be true and what the actual reality of the world is. And if you disagree with what are their faith-based arguments for what they want to be, then they'll destroy your reputation. And so it's a worldview based around what
That's all they
feels
have to
good, not
do.
what the reality is. This is a
Yep.
topic which I know will be controversial, but at the same time, I have covered it in a few previous videos. Both the feminine and authority are collectivists, submerging the individual into the group. This makes sense in that almost all societies in history are collectivist, in which people lived in clans with arranged marriages, set religions, social taboos, and traditions. The individual doesn't matter in these societies. Europe is
Exactly.
basically the historical exception for being individualist. This being so far, we focused on the negative aspects of the feminine but not the positive, which there are. Without the
Of
feminine, the
course.
masculine loses purpose. Women balance
Yes.
men out, stabilizing them. Men do their deeds, but then the women are always there, creating the next generation and keeping the society running. As I have said before, the masculine is the doing and the feminine is the being. In some ways, being is more important to happiness in life than doing, since we're always stuck inside ourselves and we're always stuck inside our own minds and bodies. I know loads of successful people, but they're often miserable since they aren't comfortable inside their own skin. The
That's
feminine
true.
aims at emotion.
That's absolutely true, man. And it's a sad state. Like I all the time, all the time, whenever I make videos and we're talking about, oh, how to live a more fulfilled life, man, everything always starts internally. It doesn't matter how much money you make, doesn't matter your social circle. It doesn't matter what type of parties you're going to, man. If you don't like who you are inside, if you can't figure out this balance that every single human has to figure out, if not, you're just going to lead yourself to ruin. You might be financially successful, but on the inside, you're tearing yourself apart. Now, imagine the other extreme where you're not successful and you're tearing yourself apart, man. It's tough times, man. It's tough times. But again, meditation, introspection, look inside yourself, figure it out, man. You can. If you can't, if you feel like you can't do it alone, there's so many resources online. There's several books, there's several guides. You can go out, and it's not necessarily, hey, go to church or go to a religion, bro. Legitimately, you have to look inside yourself because these extra things, these religions and these other things, they're gonna preach to you stuff that they believe. That doesn't necessarily mean that you believe it. It's just something that they believe in. You feel like, oh yeah, maybe I should believe in this too. That might not help. If anything, that might make it worse, bro. It's always something you have to look inside yourself first with.
Emotional and inner
Always.
stability. Thus, the feminine in its healthy form tries to increase mindfulness. Mindfulness is the inner calmness in difficult situations. To be mindful of the battle around you, but still to keep your cool. All the major world religions and many philosophies like Stoicism are all about mindfulness. They all want you to sync your mind in with God so you can feel inner peace. By surrendering to the state of being, you can feel inner calm at all times. The degree to which a society builds itself around emotional stabilization determines how feminine it is. In a theocracy, the society is run by appealing to the emotional demands of the people in the society at the expense of dealing with the outside world. Examples of this over history besides communism are the Catholic Church, Islam, the theocracies of Mesopotamia, or India. In each case, the elites are those who train the populace on how to be the best. Religion is about improving your conduct as an individual, and people's moral value is hopefully assessed by their internal character. I am
Yeah,
personally
hopefully.
more in favor of this system than Kurt is. One of the largest differences we have between us is that I am more pro-religion than Kurt is. I say this since people need this psychological stabilization to not go crazy. Removing
You guys gotta remember, besides religion, like it's the community aspect, right? Religion is one of the biggest things that keeps humans at ease and makes them feel at peace because if these hundreds of people that you could see in this video, if they all believe in the same prophet, in the same whatever, they all feel like they're going to the same place together, that keeps their mind at ease because we are social creatures. We want to be with the pack, we want to be with the group, right? But the secret is none of that shit really matters unless you look inside yourself, to be honest. If you do not look inside yourself, you can pretend, you can do this, you can do that, but you're always going to have this weird feeling inside your heart like, damn, am I missing something? At least for me, that's how I always felt, right? Because I grew up around I grew up Christian, right? And then I moved out to Asia, started studying Buddhism, and I started looking at Stoicism. I started looking at all these different philosophies and how to grow. But at the end of the day, a lot of the scriptures, and I'm not saying religion is terrible by any means, right? Because there's a lot of good teachings inside each religion. But a lot of the time, and at least this is the pattern that I found when I was doing my studying and hearing the gospel and hearing the preachers and reading the Bible and reading all this other stuff, like a lot of the time, the answer is in between the lines. A lot of the metaphors, these teachings are telling you to look inside yourself. It's always been the true answer is to look inside yourself. And it doesn't matter how many people tell it to you, unless you go out and you actually do it, you'll never really understand it because everybody has something inside them that's different. We all have this good and this bad and these thoughts, right? We all have these thoughts, but really it comes from the heart. Your brain is one thing, but your heart is another thing. Your brain, your knowledge, the information, that's all one half. The other half comes from the emotional side. And a lot of people struggle with their emotions because emotions are difficult. You legitimately have to go do some soul searching to try and find this balance. It's not just all knowledge and it's not just all emotion. Both of these things combine into the being that you are. And to make it easier, you also have to add in a third layer, which is physical health, your physical fitness, your ability to get this energy that's more primal out of you, and that comes from who we are, like, as beings, right? When we work out, when we're sweating or when we're having sex or whenever we're doing these physically demanding things, it always makes you feel better in the end, physically. So whenever you get the ability to balance the emotional issues that you have or the mental problems that you suffer with, I think that's when you can line the pieces together to find your balance as a person. Your balance and my balance and their balance is not going to be the same. We all have a balance. It's either like this, or it's like this, or it's like this, or it's like this, or it's like this, right? Give and take. Everything takes some type of sacrifice, whether you're going to sacrifice your personal time to hang out with friends, or you're going to sacrifice your social time to be with yourself, to meditate and to grow as a human being, right? Everything comes down to the balance that you give yourself, and that comes from the inside. That's the only way you can find that balance. You can't just wake up the next day and say, okay, well, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna feel good the entire day. Absolutely not. The balance fluctuates and it changes as you grow as a human being. At least this is what I've learned in my studies. Let's continue though.
It results in, ironically, our society in which we're
I'm
committing
cooking, bro.
suicide
I'm
as a
cooking.
civilization while we have the worst mental health in history, which I have said will ultimately kill our society unless it's stopped. I think you really need to establish a duality. You need to have
Yes,
this feminine side in a society no matter which other masculine side it's balanced with. This is why every major society in history is religious, and for most societies, religion was the most important thing in someone's life. The
it
question is
was
whether or not the
100%.
religion is healthy. The relationship between
That is
men
also
and
true.
women in a society determines how that culture deals with chaos. The great Asian civilizations of India, China, or Islam fossilized once they repressed women too much starting around 1000 AD. Our current society, which has no rules for the feminine, is spiraling into madness now. Europe was able to establish a very successful and adventurous society through giving women the highest amount of social authority of any major civilization, which forced men to have to do more to impress them. At the same time, men were able to hold women accountable socially. A great
Good.
irony is that the societies
Good.
which pull from
We
this
need
axis
to.
the most are the most misogynistic. The Middle East is a civilization founded off theocracy, in that in modern Islam, the legal code, government, philosophy, and clan structure are all founded off religion. This isn't true for the Middle East going back to the ancient Babylonians, Jews, or Egyptians. India is similar, also being a society run by the priests. Ironically, these societies both gave women basically no rights. It reminds me of the old joke that goes, women understand other women, and women hate each other. The feminine can be positive, as I keep saying, and is something I think young men today often forget, so I want to keep reminding you folks of it. An example of this is organized religions, which use social shaming, aesthetic, and the promise of something better to guide people towards pro-social and positive ways of life. Religions train people from birth to be humble, kind, grateful, wise, courageous, among other things. Christianity used the feminine skills for good by telling people to love each other. The feminine is based off love in that women evolved to love their children. Thus, Christianity was able to get around the negatives in female behavior by tapping into something that they evolved to do anyway, or being more pro-social for everyone around them. Christianity also has the best protections against GSR and envy. I think this is part of the reason why Christian societies are those which treated women the best, since it effectively tamed the worst aspects of female nature. The communist pro-social axis evolved for the family, and thus it results in generally trying to reach an extension of a brotherhood of family across an entire nation or an entire world. The problem is that the harmony inside a family can't scale across a group that large. This means that when this system tries to apply itself on a large scale, or more so than it just evolved for on the family basis, the results are terrible. This is why theocracies often fail, while also theocrats are normally pretty delusional. The aim for this axis is what's good, not what's true. They often aim for what they want to be true, not what is. A very important detail here is that we view the economics of family as unimportant because in the West, families largely aren't that important. But keep in mind, almost all humans in
Family is
history lived
important.
in clans, where you live and work with people who are your relatives. Your parents are arrange your marriage, you work at your cousin's store, and all of your life is your family. So, for most people in most of history, the most important economics were the economics of family. Of all these axes, this is the one which is most broken today. We are seeing a pandemic of toxic femininity. The West is committing civilizational suicide due to its own guilt, thus killing itself for emotional stability. Due to the Industrial Revolution removing men's advantage with physical labor, this axis is at the strongest point ever in history, as opposed to the other two. This is why the government today is all about creating policies that look good on paper, assuaging people's guilt, whether or not they're actually useful or effective. Our populations have terribly poor mental health. We need to fix this axis now if we want our society to survive. Unless we can't parcel through this system and take responsibility for our own mindfulness, we're doomed.
100%. Like I said it several times, man, it's all about the balance, right? And that's the big issue that's going on with society now. There's too much of one thing and not enough of the other. People aren't thinking for themselves. People are just doing what they're told, right? And doing what you're told has worked for some civilizations, but it doesn't work for everyone, man. And it's awesome, man. It's a whole 40-minute video. So dope. I enjoyed this. This is a good conversation to have, man. I'd love to share it with more people, man. Join the Discord link down below. We can have more conversations. You can share more videos like this. I have no issues checking them out. But for me, it's time to go outside. It's time to enjoy the day, time to go to the gym, time time to balance myself out more because even though I enjoy making these videos and I enjoy hanging out with you guys and talking about these types of things, at the end of the day, we also have to remember to live for ourselves. And that's a big part. I think that a lot of these cultures and a lot of these things that happen in history, that's what they're missing, man. People aren't living the lives for themselves. They're living the lives for the benefit of everybody, which obviously is good, right? We need these social structures. But at the same time, for us to be at our best, right? We're at the top of our game. We need to look inside ourselves 100%. Everybody needs to do it. And it's kind of hard because, like I said, like the world that we live in now is super connected. Global trade, all these things that exist, we never gave ourselves time to actually think. So I definitely enjoy it whenever they talk about, hey, we're gonna shorten the work week from 7 days to 5 days. Like a 5 day work week, I think is good. You give people time to actually be with themselves and figure themselves out, and they still have working times or whenever we have these like 1 week on, 1 week offs, I think more stuff like that needs to exist. But a lot of the greed that comes in with the world that we live in now, my friend Trell, he works at Amazon and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna give you $5 extra for coming in on your day off." Like, what the hell is that? Like, they don't respect the time that people have. Everybody to them is just a number and just a cog in the machine. It's absolutely disrespectful and it's sad to see. So whenever these things start loosening their grip and people can get a grip on who they are as themselves, I think that strength alone, that combined strength to say, hey, I'm stronger as an individual and now I'm ready to contribute to the group, I think will make the world way better than it is now. But we need to give people time to figure themselves out. And you can't do that whenever you're working a 7 day, you're working 7 days a week. It's just not a thing. But yeah, this is a great video. Thank you guys for watching. Join the Discord, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. It's your boy KhunShawn, signing out.